I personally think that investing your way to financial freedom is the dumbest thing that anybody could do. Look, I used to buy into the same thing that many of you are thinking, right? You invest your money into the S&P 500, put $100 away, don't drink your Starbucks coffee, put that inside of your savings account and put it into real estate, and just slowly after year after year after year, you'll finally in 30 to 40 years maybe have 3, 5, 10, even $20 million. And while that is great advice for maybe the average everyday consumer who has no idea how to actually make real wealth, this video is going to be based to my specific audience of people that understand that you can make wealth incredibly quickly. And that's actually one of the only ways to achieve what many people call escape velocity. And what escape velocity is when you make so much money in such a short period of time that you skip past all of the inflation or all of the creep up of original expenses so that you can actually then deploy that money into investments to make a difference. And then you can live off of that interest. For example, if you were to simply just invest your money into the S&P 500, put $1,000 away for 40 years, you could end up with a few $1,000,000. But if instead you took that same amount of money and you invested it in yourself or into starting a business, which in my opinion is one of the quickest and only ways to achieve escape velocity, then you could acquire millions of dollars in the first few years of your business. Within 2 to 5 years, it's potentially possible for you to make literally millions of dollars, up to $10 million in the first few years. I know that because I've done it and I've seen dozens of other people do the exact same thing. Then you can take, let's say, the $10 million that you invested into first yourself, and you can deploy that into assets. Then you can put it in the S&P 500, cryptocurrency. You actually have better loan rates. You have better investing options. You're now an accredited investor, and you put the $10 million to work for you, and let's say you earn 10% a year. That means that you're making $1 million a year for you to live off of. And because it happens so quickly, typically your lifestyle won't creep up to match it. Meaning that right now, I amassed a decent amount of wealth in a short amount of time. I am totally happy on my personal expenses being around $11,000 to $13,000 every single month. I don't think that if I was spending more money on this, I would achieve any more fulfillment or any more happiness. But what the amount of money that my companies take home is multiples higher than that every single month. So because I didn't slowly over time start making a little bit more money, and then because I had more money, I spent more money, and it was that kind of slow creep of inflation and expenses, I'm able to have a very steady floor of my, ceiling of my personal expenses, meaning $11,000 to $13,000 a month, and my investments in my business continue to grow at an exponential rate. So remember, the secret in actually achieving real financial freedom has nothing to do with investing into the S&P 500 or real estate or even cryptocurrency. It is my firm belief that you need to achieve escape velocity. You need to make an incredible amount of money in a short amount of time and invest all of the money back into that one thing that's making you the money in the first place. And then you will have the actual capital, the startup capital you need to segregate yourself from the everyday investor and actually have an amount of money you could earn interest on every single year that you could happily and easily live off of. To drive this point home, let's talk about two different scenarios. In scenario one, you essentially invest $10,000 a month, which is already an incredible amount of money to invest for most people. But let's say you invest $10,000 a month into, let's say, the S&P 500. You do that for 40 years at roughly an 8% interest rate, which is roughly what the S&P 500 returns, and you calculate an inflation rate of 3%. Well, at the end, you'll end up with around $33 million. So $10,000 a month or $120,000 a year after 40 years gives you $33 million. But the issue with that is that after, let's say, 10 years, your interest of what you could live off of if you wanted to live off of the interest is yielding you about $139,000 a year. And that's before taxes, right? So that's not enough money for most people to be able to live a decent lifestyle lifestyle, let alone a luxury lifestyle. If instead we actually wait 5 years to invest any of our money into the S&P 500 or anything like that, and we put that same amount of money, or even just $1,000 a month or $5,000 a month, into ourselves or into a business where most people can start learning an online skill for a few $1,000s and then just invest whatever the profit is that back into themselves again. If you instead do that for 5 years, and after 5 years you've made around $3 million, which is totally doable. I see people doing that in 1 to 2 years. And you still say that your interest rate is 8% a year and your inflation rate is 3%. But once again, we waited 5 years, so you're only going to be compounding for 35 years. Then at the end, you'll have $44 million. Like I said before, at the end, you had $33 million. So you have $10 million more at the end of all of this just by waiting 5 years. But not that only. If you go to down here and we look at the interest after 10 years, remember, the interest after 10 years before was going to be roughly around $137,000. The interest after 10 years on this one is going to be $479,000 that you'd be able to take home essentially every single year. And even if you looked at 5 years, you'd have $326,000 a year to live off of. And this is also hitting home the point that your expenses likely would not have creeped up because you had invested in your business for the past 5 years. And so you wouldn't have like the typical keeping up with the Joneses that you see most people deal with.